Now what I'd like to do is take you through the Excel kind of tour in terms of the toolbar and the functionality. And you can see the toolbar up here at the top is this entire section. And so let's take a tour and go through some of the things that you'll be using as we go through this class. And I want to orient you to all the different menus and the things that are important within Excel and some of the things that you can do within Excel and using the toolbar. So first of all, let's start on the left and the upper left, and this is simply a save button. So if you make changes to your document or if you make updates, this is an easy way to hit save. So all you do is push this button and it will save your data set. Keep in mind this is a save, not a save as, so you will save over with the same file name that you had before. So in this case it's Excel Skills for HR Database, so it's going to save over that file. So if you want to save a new file, make sure that you do a save as and rename the file. This is your undo button. You can do several different undos. Because I was messing around with the zoom earlier, that's why you see the list of zoom undos that I did. You can see down here all of the different actions that I took prior to that. But that's your basic undo button here. And then you can customize this quick access toolbar. So if we wanted to add a different button here, we could do that. So you could add, the open button, for example, and it shows up here. All you do to undo that is to click on this down arrow again and click on open, and it disappears. So you can add any of these things that you see here if you want to, if you find yourself using them frequently within Excel. So let's move to the File tab. That's what we used when we wanted to open the file originally. You can see here that the default tab that shows up here in the File tab is the information about this particular Excel workbook. And as I mentioned before, a workbook is made up of several worksheets. Those worksheets are the pieces along the bottom that we renamed earlier. The workbook is the collection of those worksheets. And you can see the properties here. You can see the size, the title. We're not going to add a title or anything today. You can see when it was last modified, when it was created, by whom, and you can also protect your workbook here. So if you want to put a file password on your workbook, which is sometimes important for HR, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data, things like people's age, demographics, their salary data, those kinds of things. You can protect your workbook here. So if you click on this and say encrypt with a password in order to open the document, it will ask for a password. So if you type in a password, let's call our password 12345. If you hit OK, it will ask you to re-enter the password. You have to type in the exact same password. And again, if you forget the password, you can see the caution here, it cannot be recovered. So you want to make sure that you keep a list of your passwords if you're going to protect Excel documents. Oftentimes what will happen is that you'll send the document in an email to someone, and then with a follow-up email you'll send the password, depending on your company's data protection rules and things like that. So we're not going to enter a password right now, but that's how you would do it if you need to. And then inspecting the workbook. So this is something that Microsoft Excel does on its own. You can check for any issues with the workbook. So sometimes it will be a big file and it'll check for things like pictures and things like that. Managing the workbook, if this is a shared workbook, you can check it in, check it out, recover unsaved changes. So if, for example, it crashes, this is where those unsaved changes would be. And then your browser view options. You can pick and choose what you see if it's viewed on the web. A new workbook. So if we click here, it will give us it will ask us what kind of new workbook we want. So typically you'll click on blank workbook. There are some tutorials that are available through Microsoft Excel as well. So feel free to take a look at those. Also, all sorts of things that you can do in Excel. So, back to school planner, a schedule, a calendar, those kinds of things as well available here. To-do lists. You can do just about anything you can think of in Excel. It's a very versatile tool, and you can find a lot of that stuff here. You can also find a lot of stuff on Microsoft Online too. Open, we looked at this earlier. It'll ask you where you want to open from, so we demoed that earlier. Save, if I click this, it's just going to save our workbook and take us back to the worksheet that we were working on. So I'm going to click back on File. The Save As, typical, just like a Microsoft Office document. You would click Browse wherever you want to save the document. You would rename it and then save it again. So I'm not going to do that. Saving as a PDF, again, that saves it in a different format. Printing, we'll review here in a little bit. Sharing the document is if you want to share it online. Exporting it to a different format. Publishing it if you've got a file path to publish online. And then if we want to close the program as well. Your account and options, we're going to get into options here in a minute when we go into some of the toolbars, but keep that in mind as well. So we'll get into that in a second. So that's the File tab. So mostly you're going to use that tab as kind of the big macro things that you're going to be doing with your workbook. But in terms of formatting and doing things with your actual worksheet, that really happens more with the other tabs across the top. The first one being this Home tab that you can see. This is kind of your clipboard management. So typical with any Microsoft Office environment, you have the copy and paste. So you know, when you copy a cell and want to paste it somewhere, this is where you can come. So let's say we want to copy this cell that says most recent performance rating. We can come here and we can say copy, and you can see the cell highlights as well. And then we can come over here and say paste, and it's going to paste that same cell. I'm going to undo that though. I'm going to come up to our undo button as I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to undo that paste. You can still see that the cell is highlighted, so I'm going to hit escape on my keyboard, and that will make that go away. But basically that's the copy and paste functionality. You can see your font functionality here, so you can you know, highlight different texts and change the font. So if we go from Times New Roman to some sort of Gothic, you can see as I change and highlight different fonts, you can see the font back here changing as well. So I'm not going to do that now. The font size as well. Highlighting cells in different colors is here. Your bold, italics, and underline are here. Your cell borders are here, and so you can, you know, as you're formatting your document and trying to get it ready for printing, you can format it using your borders here. You can also, in order to get to your borders, if you hit Control-1, that's a shortcut, and you can go to, that's your Format Cells menu. You can click on border here, and you can draw your borders here as well. The alignment, so this is all about the text that you're working with. So if you watch here in cell A1, as I change these, this is aligned to the top, to the left, to the middle, to the right. We're going to do middle and middle, so that takes it back to where we were. You can indent, decrease and increase your indent as well. Change the way that your text is oriented. So if I click on this, and I want to angle where it says ID number counterclockwise, I just click on that and angles that whole cell counterclockwise. I'm going to change that back and click on that again to change it back. But it's a quick way if you have a long title or something and you want them to, you know, all be angled up. If we highlight these, for example, and say angle counterclockwise, you can see it changes the angle of our cells there. Sometimes useful for creating some charts and matrices. I oftentimes see things like skills matrices and competency matrices and things with the names of the columns rotated like that, because they're oftentimes longer names, especially in the field of HR. Merge and center, so if you want to merge two cells together, you click on this button here and it will merge them and center the text that you highlight. Wrapping text is what we have here. If I didn't wrap the text, so I unclick this, you can see that it manager of people changed to just a straight line, but in order to get it to fit in the column better, I wanted to wrap it, so I did it there. The number formatting, this oftentimes will come up when you're trying to write a formula and you have something that looks like a number. Oftentimes it might be copied in as text, so you want to come up here in your number formatting and change that here. Conditional formatting we'll get into a little bit later in our class. Formatting as a table, again, we'll get into as well. Cell styles, inserting and deleting rows is here. So simply if you select a row, so I clicked on 3 over here, the black arrow, and it highlights the whole cell. If I say insert, it will insert a row above that where I highlighted. If I hit then delete, it will delete that row as well. Auto sum, so this is functionality that we'll talk about in a different module. Filling the cells down and clearing cells we'll talk about as well. Sorting and filtering we'll talk about, and then find and select too. Insert, we'll talk about pivot tables in some length later. We have recommended pivot tables as well. You can insert a picture here too. So if you have a picture saved in your PC, you can insert it here. Oftentimes you don't insert too many pictures in Excel, only if you're trying to pretty something up for printing or something like that. You can get to online pictures as well from a variety of sources. You can insert different shapes, so sometimes you want to insert an arrow, just like any other Office program. You have Smart Art as well. Charts are over here, so we're going to skip over the add-ins piece because we don't really use those too much. So charts, you can insert all sorts of different charts depending on the data. We'll get into that in some detail as well. The line and column and win-loss we'll get into. Slicers we'll talk about later, so I'm not going to review those in great detail now. Hyperlinks, so if you can add a hyperlink to your workbook and to your worksheet through this. Text box, header and footer we'll talk about a little bit later. And then adding an equation as well we'll talk about, and symbols too. Your page layout, so this is where you get to all of your kind of your formatting with your page, so you can adjust the theme and the colors and your margins, the orientation of the page. Oftentimes you'll change the orientation. Right now it's set up as portrait. Oftentimes you'll change it to landscape based on how much data you have and what you want to fit on a page. The size of the page and the print area we'll talk about here in a minute. Putting in page breaks, the background, so sometimes you want to put in a background if you're trying to pretty it up for printing. Printing different tiles, the height and width and the scale, so scale to fit for printing. Grid lines, so sometimes when you're doing like a dashboard and things, for example, you want to get rid of your grid lines, which are these lines that denote the different boxes. You can just come up here and deselect that checkbox. It defaults to showing the grid lines, but sometimes you don't want to see them. You can see that it looks much more clean. You still have the different boxes. You just can't see them because we've taken the grid lines off. In this case over here, I have already formatted this as a table, so it's inserted the grid lines and I've put in borders. And if we click on grid lines here, you can see them. They appear again, those light gray lines. And then it'll ask you if you want to print those grid lines. If you do, you just select the print grid lines checkbox there, and headings as well. Bringing forward and backwards, this is all the same as, for example, PowerPoint. If you have something in front of another object or picture, you can bring it forward or send it back. Formulas, we'll talk about these in a different module, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but you can insert functions, auto sum. It'll always keep your recently used functions that you've used, and then it gives a list of all sorts of Excel functions that you may use. Logical functions we'll talk about, text functions, dates and times, lookup and reference. So all of these different things you can do in Excel, all sorts of things that you can use. Define names we're going to skip over because we're not going to talk much about that. Formula auditing, so you can trace the precedence of your formulas and it will show you where that particular formula in that cell is referencing. You can trace the dependence as well, very similar. What else is dependent on that particular cell, which is interesting. So if you're trying to do an audit on your formulas and you don't understand why the formula is not working, this is oftentimes very helpful as well. You can also check for errors if there are any. And then you have your calculation options as well. So oftentimes I will leave it on automatic. Sometimes it will, you may want to type in a bunch of formulas and not have it calculate so that you can go back and audit those formulas later. And in that case, you may want to have it in manual. If you do have it in manual, keep in mind, if you put it in formulas, it won't calculate the results of those formulas unless you come back here and select calculate now. So keep that in mind. Again, the default is automatic. I would recommend keeping it in automatic. Your data tab here, you can see kind of if you do want to get external data, you've got to set it up from other sources. So this will ask you kind of where you want to get it from. If you're continually updating data, so let's say you want to connect to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, you can do that through this. It's much more advanced than what we're going to get into in this class, but it is possible, and something that you may want to look at once you get through this course. Getting and transforming data, again, this is when you're querying data, and you bring it into this, and again, pretty advanced stuff. We're not going to get into it in this class. Connections as well. Now this, the sort and filter piece, we're going to talk about filters. Right now you can see the drop down arrows. I have filters on this data, so I'm going to take those off right now because we're going to get into that a little bit later. In terms of sorting data, we'll get into that as well. Advanced filtering, sending text to columns, we'll talk about. Removing duplicates, doing some data validation. We'll do all of this in other modules. Forecasting is a little bit advanced for this particular class, as is grouping and ungrouping as well. Your review tab, very similar to other Microsoft Office applications. You have your thesaurus, your spelling, your lookups, your comments, those kinds of things. So as you're putting, passing workbooks back and forth with colleagues, oftentimes you'll put comments or notate things in the different cells. This another place where you can protect your sheet or your workbook is here. So again, if you click here, it's going to bring you to what password do you want to use to unprotect it. It's going to ask you for it again twice, just like it did before. So again, be careful with protecting workbook. Viewing, you can, a lot of the workbook views are here. Again, if you want to show the grid lines or not is another checkbox here. Zooming, again, there's another way to do it here. I prefer down here, just it's easier instead of multiple clicks up here. Freezing panes, it's oftentimes in a big Excel workbook, you'll want to freeze the panes so that you can scroll through. So if I select here freeze top row, it's going to freeze this top row, and I can scroll down and view kind of the people as we go. So that makes it really easy to kind of, instead of, if we unfreeze, instead of saying, oh shoot, what was that? What was this? Was this work country? Was this where the person lives? Was this what was this? Instead of that, you can just come up here and say freeze panes. I'm sorry. Let's do freeze top row, and you can just scroll through, and your top row stays. So it's very, very helpful as you're going through data and mining through the data. And then macros are here again. That's pretty advanced as well. So that is the kind of introduction to Excel tour and the toolbar. So we're going to click back on home and go into our next piece.